We know this parable very well, the parable of the sower. The seed is scattered, some gets eaten up by the birds, some seed has no roots, some is choked by thorns, and some grows up for a great harvest. You might think, I think I do sometimes, that this parable is about evangelization, how we share the gospel with others, how to scatter seed. But it's not at all. Just think about the basic parable. The assumption is that the seed is being scattered by the sower. He's doing his job. Now you can take that as Jesus the sower or us in our mission to share the faith, but that's the starting point of the parable. The seed is being scattered. It's where it's meant to be. No, this is not a parable about evangelization. It's a parable about what goes wrong when the seed, the word of God, arrives in someone's heart. They all hear it in the parable, but they don't all respond and grow as they could, as they should. Put it another way, this parable is about why Christians lose their faith. Jesus gives 3 reasons. He's a good teacher. He thinks in threes. He's very practical. And just think of yourself. I'm not going to ask you to stand up and testify, but the times when maybe you have struggled with your faith or even stopped practicing. Why was it? Why? Think of your friends and family. You're here now in the chapel. You are committed, watching the live stream. It shows an act of faith. Something is alive in you of the faith, however big or small, but you have friends and family who maybe had a living faith and it doesn't seem to be very present to them. Why have they lost their faith? Just to analyze it a bit, because it's not just, oh, blah, whatever. There's a reason behind it, usually. Here are the 3 reasons Jesus says are the biggest and the most common. The first one, it surprises me, the order he puts these in. He says the first reason people lose their faith is because they don't understand it. It's the lack of understanding. The seed is scattered, the birds eat it up, and Jesus says this is the word of the kingdom that is not understood. So it's not enough to just hear the word, to be brought up in a Christian culture, to grow up Christian in a family. Remember that phrase of Sherry Waddell's that I've quoted before? God has no grandchildren. God has no grandchildren. In other words, your parents might be the children of God. They might pray the Our Father and call him their Father. But because you're children of your parents, it doesn't make you God's grandchildren. God only has children. So if you want to be his children, you need to become his children just as your parents are his children. It's not enough to have been taught Christianity, to just know the facts, although if only we did know the facts. I'll come on to that in a minute. We need real understanding to enter into it, make it personal. Some of our medical students here are studying hard for their exams now. They're memorizing all these books about clinical practice, but the real understanding won't come until they move into clinical practice themselves, putting knowledge into practice and seeing how it works. And yes, we need to deepen personally our understanding of the knowledge we have, to crack the nut open, to plant the seed, to make it real. But look, if we don't have any knowledge in the first place, God help us. Nothing's going to happen. The challenge that we have adult Christians walking around, saying their prayers, coming to church, and very often they have very little understanding or even knowledge of the basics of the Christian faith. I'm not making any judgments here. I'm just saying this is the reality of faith, of the church, of growing up in a certain way for many people. The challenge is to know and learn about and understand our faith, and then to make it personal and more real and more life-giving. Look, this is my freshers sermon, in effect. I say this on the first Sunday of October here at the University Chaplaincy every year. I say to the students, you have the minds and the hearts and the intelligence of the 18, 19-year-olds that you are. All the energy and passion that you're going to put into your studies, into your history, your philosophy, your medicine, your maths. But your faith formation, for many of you, stopped when you were 14 at confirmation, or it stopped when you were 7 at your first Holy Communion classes, or you went to communion and confirmation classes and basically you learned nothing, and your faith formation is what? It's what you've happened to pick up along the way. You've had very little catechesis and knowledge. Knowledge isn't everything, as I said, but it's something, and it's the beginning. Again, I'm not judging or condemning here. I'm just saying, let's be realistic and realize that we often, as Jesus says, lose the faith because we don't know and understand it. And this happens when we hit a difficulty. Our faith seems irrelevant, or we just think, because we don't know it very well, that yes, my faith just is cultural baggage. It is just what my parents had. Or even worse, it's just a kind of superstition that I've grown out of since I've become an enlightened adult. Or even with a good heart, a feeling that, yeah, I know I'm a Christian, but it doesn't really have any relevance to me. Or there's no excitement, wonder at the beauty of faith, no fascination with Jesus Christ, with our faith, no wonder. When we meet a difficulty, faith can collapse. When it doesn't make sense, when it clashes with the values of the world, we can be tempted to assume that the world is correct and we're wrong. Or when we're struggling with life personally and we can't understand why, and our faith doesn't seem to say anything relevant. The challenge to go deeper, to learn our faith, to study, to grow in general, and especially when we meet specific problems or challenges, to say, okay, in this area I'm struggling, I need to go deeper in this particular area. How can I learn about this part of my Christian faith, or what it says to my life? The second reason in the parable why people give up their faith is the seed falls on rocky ground. It springs up quickly, but it's got no roots. No roots, so it just withers and dies. A Christian who has no roots, no depth, no endurance, no perseverance, especially when trouble or persecution comes. This is very real. How many people I've known who have stopped living their faith because of suffering and difficulties. It might be a difficulty that was connected with their faith. They were living their Christianity and it began to cost them something. There was some opposition or some sacrifice or just some teasing or rejection. Or it might be, and this is more common actually, just the suffering of life, hitting a brick wall, just really the grief and the suffering of life that's led to a panic, a mistrust of God, and even an anger. Suffering is hard to bear. So persecution comes, troubles come, suffering comes. Just on the radio this morning, a review of the papers on Broadcasting House I was listening to, and all the discussion there this week in the Sunday papers about free speech and cancel culture. You know this phrase. When your views don't square with the prevailing culture, and on social media you get cancelled, deleted by one or two friends or by the whole glorious world of the Twitter mob. Now, I'm not claiming to know where the line is every time between what's acceptable and what isn't acceptable. There is a line somewhere. But I just say it is harder and harder for Christians to simply be Christians without fear of being cancelled, at least by polite society and their peers and friends. Notice Jesus doesn't say you can avoid suffering. He's saying you will suffer, but some are prepared for it and some aren't. That's the question. As Christians, are we prepared for suffering? It's not will it happen to us, it will. And you're very blessed if you haven't met great suffering yet, but just it will. So are you prepared? Do you have the resilience, the resources? So much teaching of Jesus is about taking up one's cross, following him, and the cost of discipleship. He never said it would be easy. But when suffering comes to us, very often we act surprised. It's weird, really. We kind of say, oh, I didn't expect this. We knew the possibility in theory, but the reality is much harder. We need, I'm not being dismissive here, we need the support of others, the help of God, the help of the church. Suffering is a great cross, but it's naive to think it's not going to happen. And it's a little bit naive to give up just because the suffering comes. This is part of the Christian journey. And the final reason for losing faith, according to Jesus, is the seed that grows among thorns. So this seed is growing, great, but it's getting choked. It's still alive, it's visible. People can look and say, look at this wonderful seed that's growing, but it's choked. Jesus says this is the Christian who is strangled by the cares of the world and the lure of riches. Be attentive here. Jesus doesn't say that the Christian, you and me, cannot be living in the world. He doesn't say all possessions or even riches are wrong. There's so much more teaching about the nuances there. He's speaking about the specific spiritual danger of getting caught up in the world, in activity, in worry and anxiety, in desire and acquisitiveness. You have so much to do and think about that you get lost, trapped, and your faith gets smothered, even though it's alive and real. Do you see the difference with the other things? Your faith is alive. You believe, you understand it, you want to live it, but it's smothered by everything else. Jesus gets crowded out. And even if the external practice of religion continues, your personal prayer, your coming to Mass, your hearts and minds, my heart and mind, can be completely chained to worry and desire. No wonder we're so distracted when we come to Mass and come to prayer if we're distracted every other minute of the day. We're not free. How to get some detachment, some freedom, some space, and to realize not that we have to become a monk or a nun, but that we are over-invested in our worldly activities. Sometimes in our sins, okay, that's as it were the easy one. Sin is wrong. We should be able to know that and confront it, say sorry and go to confession. But even more difficult to spot that we're over-invested in possibly good or neutral things, or we're just crushed by the burden of life, and how important it is to find spiritual space, prayer, to protect our souls. We need places of sanctuary. These are Jesus's three topics, tips. This week, I've been speaking on the Pause for Faith about St. Therese of Lisieux, so I can do some shameless product placement. If you want to watch 3 videos about St. Therese, you can find them on the channel here. I'm doing it for your spiritual good, not for my own. I've been speaking about St. Therese and just how beautifully she illustrates these struggles. because she wasn't this sweet, pious, bourgeois French saint who had it all easy. She was thoroughly human, just like you and me, with exactly the same struggles and the struggles Jesus is talking about. The importance of understanding faith and searching when you can't find an answer. Just one example. She had a passionate desire to serve the Lord and give everything, to be a martyr, a saint, a missionary, evangelist, but she couldn't fulfill it. And she felt frustrated. She was tormented by unfulfilled longings, and she was tempted to give in and kind of give up. How can I find what I'm looking for? But she kept searching. She kept talking to God about what was on her mind. She kept reading the Bible, looking for answers. And one day the Lord spoke. She read 1 Corinthians 13 about love. And years later, she wrote this in her autobiography. Charity gave me the key to my vocation. I understood that love comprised all vocations, all times and places. My vocation is love. In the heart of the church, I shall be love. Thus I shall be everything, and my dream will be realized. She found an answer. God gave her an answer, but it's because she kept looking, kept praying, kept reading the scriptures, kept searching. And suffering. Many of us give up when the first moment of suffering comes. Therese didn't. And she was quite tough on others. She was tough on the novices she had to train. She wrote, many serve Jesus when he is consoling them, but few consent to keep company with Jesus, sleeping on the waves of suffering in the garden of agony. Who then will be willing to serve Jesus for himself? It's easy to serve Jesus when you're not suffering, to believe when you're consoled. But can you believe and love Jesus and love your neighbour when you're not feeling consoled, when you yourself are burdened by the suffering and you need consolation? That's the moment of truth and testing, said Therese. And finally, when the burdens were becoming almost overwhelming, the darkness, the spiritual darkness that Therese experienced at the end of her life, and the agony of dying over an extended 18 months with tuberculosis, what she suffered physically and spiritually, and the temptation to give up her faith, very real, very, very stark. But she said, while I do not have the joy of faith, I am trying to carry out its works at least. I conduct myself bravely. I run to Jesus. And she said, in such a tough but truthful way, joy isn't found in the objects that surround us, but in the innermost recesses of the soul. The inner strength that St. Therese had to persevere into faith, to keep loving Jesus, despite all the difficulties and all the sufferings. And that it wasn't just darkness and bleakness, that the Lord touched her with that inner joy and that faithfulness that she needed. If you want to read more about her, please read her biography, A Story of a Soul, The Story of a Soul. And I promise you this will give you great insight into your own faith and especially into the gospel today.